I'm Steve Mann, and welcome to You Can Make a Difference. I grew up on a small potato farm in Idaho, where I quickly learned the value of hard work and developed a desire to see and experience the world beyond the fence line. That curiosity shaped my life. Over the years, I've founded or co-founded 4 successful businesses and 4 humanitarian foundations. I've worked with U.S. presidents, built leadership programs, and moved my family across the world to fight HIV/AIDS in Africa, all by being a husband to my amazing wife and raising a beautiful, multiracial family. I've traveled to more than 50 countries, met countless people, and learned from many cultures. Along the way, like you, I've developed beliefs, principles, and values that matter deeply to me, which I want to pass on to my children, grandchildren, and beyond. That's what this channel is about. You Can Make a Difference explores how we pass on wisdom, not just information, by sharing our stories and life experiences. Today's younger generation doesn't need more data. They need context, perspective, and meaning. Stories help us humanize life, start meaningful conversations, and give the next generation the confidence and clarity they need to navigate a fast-changing world. I'm glad you're here. Today, we have with us a special guest, Mandy Lane. I first met Mandy in Zimbabwe many, many years ago when my family and I had moved there to work on the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And we were totally lost. We didn't know how to find a pharmacy or where we could get groceries or anything. And Mandy and her family just opened arms, welcomed us in, and made life much, much easier. Mandy's kind of everlasting kindness made Zimbabwe feel like home to us. Now, I asked Mandy to join us today to talk about a special attribute that has been important to her and that she has tried to pass on to her children. And that attribute is respect. Mandy, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself, growing up in Zimbabwe, and how respect came to be such an important attribute for you?
Okay. I grew up in Zimbabwe with a wonderful family. It was a wonderful place to grow up. And it was later on as I grew up, met Bob, got married. It was a really wonderful place to raise my children. They have fond memories of growing up there. Our life was very, very good. We were obviously a wealthier family than the general population. And growing up in Zimbabwe, it was the norm to have domestic workers. We had a housekeeper or a cook, and we had a gardener. And these were people who lived on our property, who worked in our houses and worked in our yards. And growing up, we had the same with my parents. And I learned from my parents to really respect those people. And that's why I think respect has become such an important attribute for me. When my children were young, we had somebody called Janet who came to work for us.
Yeah, tell me about Janet a little bit. I actually met Janet when I was there.
You did. She came to work for us when my children were very young, and she very quickly became a part of our family. She worked for us for between 16 and 18 years until we actually left to come to the United States. And over the years, I learned to really love and respect Janet, as did my kids. She was an incredible human being. She would walk in the room and her smile just lit up the room. And she was just a constant in our lives. Bob traveled a lot and he was away, and he'd be away for sometimes weeks on a time. But Janet was always there. And she worked side by side with me. We got to know her family. We got to know her children. Her children grew up living on our property, and we would take them to church, give them rides to school. My mom was also living next door, and she did the same. And they also became sort of part of the family. And it was, we were able to help Janet to educate her kids, which was something some people did, other people didn't. But I'd like to help her as much as I could. And she really was constant source of support, and for me and for my children.
Now, you mentioned to me one time that you found one time your own children were maybe being a little short with Janet,
Um,
and how you needed to talk to them about that.
yes, and I basically told them that, you needed that you'd speak to people the way you'd like to be spoken to. Doesn't matter who they are, what background they come from, that you treat everybody with respect. And I think when you treat people with respect, you learn to love them. You learn about them, you learn about their background, their attributes. And I also learned a lot from my own kids, because growing up at school in the time in Zimbabwe, they were learning things as they went along and being taught respect by the teachers. And that was a common thing in Zimbabwe as well, was being taught to respect other people. And recently, when we went back to Zimbabwe, we went on a trip. One of the first people that we thought of wanting to see while we were there and made sure that we saw was Janet, because she had just been such an integral part of our lives and my children's lives growing up. And we took her out to lunch, and she brought two of her daughters who had grown up with us. They were it was just wonderful to see them. They had grown up, they had developed these personalities, and it was just an amazing experience. And while we were sitting there and discussing, we talked about the past and how things had been and how their lives had been since we had last seen them. And there came a time where they started thanking us for the difference that we'd made in their lives. And I felt, and I've come to appreciate, the difference they made in mine. Their lives have changed our lives, and I think it was a mutual respect, a mutual love for one another. We feel like family. Their daughters said, "You're our family." They hugged my kids while we were there, and just said, "We've missed you." And so it's. I just think that as we show respect to other people, everything kind of falls into place.
Mandy, I have, while I was there, experienced a lot of different families and the way they dealt with their domestic workers.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a number of them who domestic workers were a different caste, a different level.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of were talked only when they were talked to.
Yeah.
And, they didn't interact with the family at all.
Yeah.
And what made that different in your family? You didn't want it to be that way.
No, I didn't. Because I grew up with a family that, from a small child, that we had domestic workers, and my parents always treated them with respect, spoke to them, helped them with their children. There was one period in my parents' life where they were paying school fees for 9 children, not their own. This was the children of their domestic workers. And it just came naturally to me to want to do the same
And you did that with Janet's children.
Yes, I did.
And share with me what's happened to those kids.
Okay. Janet came from a very poor background, and her father was a domestic worker. He was a cook. They moved from Malawi and they came to Zimbabwe, and he was a cook. And then she, in following that, became a domestic worker, and I'm very grateful came to work for me. Her children, however, their lives have changed. The 2 daughters that came for lunch, the one daughter is now she's a radiographer assistant working at the Diagnostic Imaging Center in Harare. The other daughter who was there is doing a nursing degree in Zambia. Her nephew, who lived with us from when he was 2 years old, is caring in the United Kingdom and doing very well. Is able to send money to Janet and her husband when he can. The other daughter's nursing in the United Kingdom, and the elder daughter, who I didn't really have a lot to do with, but she did a university degree at the University of Zimbabwe and in child speech therapy. So all of them have these their lives are good. They have really good jobs. They are doing well in their lives. And it was just for me, an incredible blessing and opportunity to see that.
But their lives are good in part because you treated them with respect enough to pay for their education, and that changed the whole course of their life.
Yeah.
And that's not always the way things work.
No, it's not. But to be able to see that has happened is just, for me, it's life-changing.
How do you teach respect to your own grandchildren?
I think, well, by telling stories, sharing experiences, but also by showing them respect. As my grandchildren, listening to them, listening to their opinions. And I think if we focus more on showing respect than on getting respect, then things just naturally fall into place. You can't respect someone without being kind to them, without being interested in them. And I think just by being an example of showing respect to my grandchildren and to the people around us.
See, I think in part you take respect to a little different level. For some, respect would mean just, well, I don't call them names or I don't yell at them.
Mm-hmm.
But your definition of respect goes beyond just not doing bad things into doing good things and really treating people as equals.
Yes.
And that's something you learn from your parents and are trying to pass on to your grandchildren.
Yes, definitely.
Now, have your grandchildren heard this story about Janet?
They have.
I suppose because in your family, they just think that's normal.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they were surprised when I told them that we had people who worked in our homes. I mean, that was like, what?
Because they've grown up here in the U.S.
They've grown up in the U.S. and they see us leading a normal life in the United States. And let me just clarify something. We weren't a wealthy family in Zimbabwe. I mean, we were wealthy by, in terms of the general population there. But in terms of American, I guess, order of things, we were just middle class, normal family in Zimbabwe.
But it's a different set of standards, isn't it? By
is.
American standards, you were kind of a normal middle class family. Yeah. By Zimbabwe standards, if you look at the whole population, we were in the
top wealthy.
Yeah,
that's true.
That perspective makes a big difference.
It does.
Now,
it does.
You have another interesting story.
I do.
That is here in America.
Yeah.
Which comes at it from a little different view. And that's where you were working. Why don't you share that with us?
Okay. I was working for an employment agency, but a slightly different employment agency. I'd gone in for a job interview, and it was a company that hired people who basically faced fairly unique challenges in their lives. They were people who couldn't be employed in a traditional sense. They had, the challenges that they faced. I mean, some of them struggled with drug addiction. Some of them had been in prison. Some of them were homeless. Some of them had mental health problems. So they were people who weren't employable in the true sense of the word. But what that company did was that they employed them on a daily basis and paid them on a daily basis. And I remember the first time when I went there for my interview, I was sitting and I was actually having to wait for quite a long time. Something was going on and they weren't able to come out, initially and interview me. So I sat for probably close on an hour, and there was a lady there who was very obviously under the influence of drugs, and quite severely. And I sat watching her, and it was kind of a shocking situation for me, because in Zimbabwe we had never really been exposed to many drugs back in those days.
Yeah.
And to see this individual who was very obviously distressed and having a pretty hard time was kind of distressing for me. And then I saw other people coming in and going, and then had the interview, and I was told what it entailed. And I was a little nervous. To be honest, I didn't know if I could take the job, but I needed a job. I mean, I was here, and it was something I needed to do. And so I accepted the job, and I thought about it really hard, and I thought, how am I going to do this? I'm not used to working with people in this situation. How am I going to handle it? And I made the decision that I would just treat people the way that I would wish to be treated, which is with kindness and with respect. And it really was life-changing for me.
Now, you mentioned to me that the person who held your job first wouldn't let people by her desk. They had to sit, and she wouldn't talk to them. It was kind of, you come up when you're spoken to, and you changed that approach.
I did. I encouraged them to come up to the counter to talk to me. I asked them questions. I asked them how their day had been, because that's what I would have liked people to treat me. How I would have liked people to treat me, was to be interested in me, to ask me questions. And so by doing that, they started to realize that I was someone they could talk to and someone I could trust. And they started to tell me their stories. I would ask them how their day had been, and then as we got to know each other better, they shared their stories with me. And I listened to these stories, and it gives me chills just thinking about it now, because they had normal lives. They had started off well in many situations, and then by some twist of fate, whether it was by a bad choice that they had made or something that had happened to them, their lives had changed. And as I learned about their stories and their lives and their backgrounds, I just thought, there but by the grace of God go I.
So they weren't just part of the job. They weren't just elements to move from one place to the other. They, for you, were real people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, something happened when you left that job. Would you share that with us?
So just one thing that I wanted to share before I do finish off with what you had just asked me. So often, as people in a society, we label people by their challenges. As I said, these people had unique and different challenges to what I've experienced in my life. And, you look at a person and say, well, they're a drug addict, and we label them. We put these labels on them. And then we kind of cast them aside because we've labeled them like that. And for me, being able to talk to these people and learn about them, those labels fell away, because they were just like you and I. They were people with dreams and lives and families. And had I not kind of broken down that barrier that I had with them, I wouldn't have learned about that. And it was an absolutely life-changing experience for me. And then, obviously, when I moved on, I was moving on to a new job, and my life was changing, and so I handed in my notice, and I was leaving, and I was absolutely humbled and amazed at how these people who had so little, some of them slept on the streets at night, some of them slept in their car, but they gave me presents. They gave me cards. And they wrote amazing words to me, thanking me for everything that I had done for them and for how I changed their lives, without realizing actually how much it was a life-changing experience for me being able to work with them and get to know them. So I feel that when you do show people respect, and when you focus on showing respect, you gain so much more than you give.
Well, I see that's two totally different circumstances. You treated Janet with respect and went beyond what everybody does and helped pay for their children's education. And that ended up with children with degrees and working all over the world. That wouldn't have happened because respect to you was more than just the basics. It was kindness. It was treating people as you would like to be treated.
And treating them as family.
Yeah.
They were my family.
And the same with this group here in the U.S. at work. They're often the nameless, we don't see them, the invisible people.
Yes.
But because you treated them as human beings with respect, it changed their lives as well as yours.
Yeah.
Have you relayed that to your children?
I have.
Or your grandchildren?
I have.
What did they think about that?
They were a little astounded, actually. It was on this last Saturday. I decided, because I was, I was going to tell that story, I decided to share it with them. And I told them that whole story about working and these people that I'd met. And, and I said to them how important it is that even if people are different to us, if they come from different backgrounds or they're different skin color or a different religion,
they're people.
They're people, and they have worth and they have value. And there was another little girl who was there, a friend of theirs, and she was absolutely enthralled with the story I was telling. And my daughter Tracy asked her, "What does this story teach you?" And she said, and this little 6-year-old, and she said, to treat everybody with kindness and love and respect. And my grandson Richard then told his own little story about how he is being bullied a little at school. And I know the child that he was talking about. And I said, "And how do you deal with that?" And he said, "My mom told me just to be kind and just say, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, and just walk away." And I said, yeah. And in a way, by not engaging and getting involved in an argument, that's showing your self-respect, not stooping to that same level, And so I think it's just the stories that we tell our grandchildren makes a huge difference. I wanted to share, every time I go there, I get there on Saturday, they drag me into their bedroom. And I sit with them, and they each have their own bedroom, and I have to spend a certain amount of time with one, and then the other one's like, okay, my turn, and I go through to that room, and then I go back to the other one who's building something to show me, and I go back, and I have this amazing time with my grandkids. I never get to speak to the adults because I'm always, Granny gets dragged into the bedroom.
Telling stories
and sharing things with them, and that is really important to me.
And it gives them a different perspective on life.
Mm-hmm.
I, like you, grew up in a terrific family, but I'd like to share one story where I was not so kind in what I was doing. And I was older, and I was on a red eye from San Francisco to New York because I had meetings early in the morning.
Uh-huh.
And if you've ever been on a red eye, they're terrible.
Yeah.
And, you leave San Francisco at 10, 11 o'clock, long flight in the dark, and you get into New York early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to get into Manhattan for some meetings. But wouldn't you know it, luggage is gone.
Oh, my gosh.
And so first I'm standing in this long line to talk to the luggage people, getting more and more upset because I've got to get in for this meeting. And the man in front of me had black leather clothes on, all kinds of tattoos. Now, remember, this is 50 years ago when tattoos weren't so normal like they are today. And he had a silver bar through his nose with a chain coming from one end to connect to his ear, and long, greasy hair. And I'm thinking all kinds of horrible things about this guy and not saying anything, fortunately. But he gets to the counter and in this soft voice says to the person at the airline, I came all this way because it's my mother's birthday and I wanted to surprise her. And the little gift I have for her is in that case, so it's really important that I get it back. And I'm sitting behind him thinking, Steve, you idiot. Look at all the things you were thinking about this guy, the judgments you were making with no reason.
Yeah.
And what you're discovering is a totally different person in just a few words.
Absolutely.
And boy, I learned a lesson from the other side. Steve, you got to be careful what you do and what you let your mind do.
Yeah.
One other quick one from me. Well, when you hear that story, what do you think?
No, it's what we do. We automatically put labels on people.
Yeah.
We have this preconceived idea because of how someone looks or how perhaps they behave. And we certainly make judgments where we shouldn't, because I think that's where it gets dangerous. You can't judge a book by its cover.
You know, a few years ago, well, 10 years ago now, my wife and I were living in St. George, and we were commuting once a week, about 3 hours down to the Navajo reservation, where we were piloting a program on self-reliance. And before we went down there, I had all kinds of people say, well, they're not going to talk to you because you're white. They're not going to share anything. And probably most of them won't come after the first time. And almost nobody will graduate. So don't expect too much.
Wow.
And I got down there, and first we had a huge crowd. We had to divide it into two. So my wife took one group, and I took the other group. And we weren't so much teaching as we were teaching them how to teach each other.
Okay.
And this course went on for about 10 weeks. We didn't lose anybody.
Oh, wow.
And we ended up with the highest graduation rates of any of the programs that we had piloted.
Oh, wow.
Not only that, but many years later, I came back, and those same people in that first class were now teaching the class to others. And the other thing about it is this class was split between Hopi and Navajo, who don't always get along.
Okay.
And when we had our graduation, somebody asked me, how did you get them to work together? I said, we didn't do anything. It's just as they were talking to each other, they found out they had the same beliefs and hopes and fears.
Yeah.
And they just started working together. It wasn't anything we did. It was just giving people a chance to talk about each other.
And I think that's really true. The more we learn about each other, the more we realize that we have in common and the less differences that we have.
Yeah.
You know, we all share that common humanity.
So your story is really about respect. To me, are more than respect. In fact, when we first talked, you said you wanted to talk about kindness.
Yeah.
And I think you did. I think your definition of respect goes beyond the basics, and it's a love of people, a non-judgmental approach, and a kindness.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to say, and maybe I should have mentioned it sooner, but my grandmother was very kind. My Nana. And I spent a lot of time with her growing up. And I saw the kindness that she had for everybody. She picked up strays, and not stray animals. She picked up strays along the way. She invited anybody who needed a place to stay, who was maybe going through something in their life. She invited them into her home. She took care of them. She loved them. And by the same token, my mom has always been very kind and shown respect for people. We sometimes say my mom sees the world through rose-tinted glasses because she always thinks the best of people. She doesn't think the worst.
Not a bad way to see the world, is it?
Exactly. And so for me, showing respect and kindness kind of go hand in hand.
Well, Mandy, thank you so much for being with me this morning. I hope our listeners are able to feel your kindness through the screen.
Oh, thank you.
and maybe have a little better understanding of how we can treat people different. And as we treat respect, we're in turn treated with respect.
Yeah.
And maybe some ideas on how they can teach that same concept to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
In our next episodes, we'll explore other attributes that have shaped our lives and how storytelling can make a real difference in the lives of others. We'll also be inviting guests from all walks of life to share their attributes and stories and how they've tried to pass them on to a younger generation. If you'd like to learn more about me or my book, Stories That Shape Us, visit steve-mann.com, where you can download a free bonus chapter on discussing controversial issues with family and friends, something most of us tend to avoid. You can also share your own stories or attributes you'd like to see us cover here on the channel. Join us next time as we continue exploring how the stories from your life can become a gift of experience for others. And if this episode resonated with you, please subscribe and invite someone you care about to join you. Also, please send us a note on how you are sharing your wisdom with your children and grandchildren. Remember, you can make a difference.